The mountain was still half asleep when Clara Vale came walking up the road, her dog trotting close beside her, his breath rising in pale ribbons against the cold dawn. The mist lay thick over the valley, softening the edges of every fence post and pine trunk until it looked like a dream someone had almost forgotten. Her skirt was torn, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, and her boots whispered through the frost. She carried a single coin in her pocket, 50 cents, and a bundle of tools wrapped in old linen. They said she'd lost her mind, that no decent woman would live alone in the high country, not with wolves prowling and men gossiping. But she'd long ago learned that silence was kinder than pity. When she reached the old property line, just a wire fence and a sagging gate, she stopped. The barn ahead of her was leaning like an old drunk, its boards split, roof half caved in. Smoke-gray swallows had nested in the rafters. Yet there was something about it, something like the shape of a memory, that made her chest ache. Old Josiah Pike stood waiting, his hat low, breath steaming in the chill. "You sure you want this wreck, miss?" he asked, half amused, half suspicious. She nodded once, calm and clear. He spat into the dirt, then took her coin between two fingers, flipping it once before dropping it into his pocket. 50 cents for 50 years of rot, he muttered. "A fair trade, I suppose." Clara smiled faintly. "It's not rot," she said. "It's would waitin' to be useful again." By noon, she and Rufus had moved inside. Dust rose like ghosts around her feet as she swept. The floorboards groaned. Every nail sang a tired note of memory. She found a broken lantern in the corner, cleaned it, and lit a small flame. The light shivered along the rafters, touching years of cobwebs and forgotten hay. Rufus curled near the door, watching her with quiet faith. From the road below, the town's voices carried faintly, laughter, a horse's whinny, and the constant hum of gossip. Folks at the general store would already be whispering, "That Vale girl's back, the one who lost everything." Some said she'd gone crazy after her family's ranch burned. Others swore she'd run off with a drifter who never returned. No one knew the truth, and she didn't know it to them. When the first night came, Clara sat by the small fire she'd coaxed from scraps and dry moss. She ate a crust of bread, gave Rufus his share, and watched the smoke curl up through the hole in the roof. Wind sighed through the boards, but she didn't mind. The silence was heavy, yes, but it was honest. She closed her eyes and whispered, "We're home now, boy." Rufus lifted his head and thumped his tail once, as if he understood. The days that followed passed like pages in an old hymn book, quiet, full of rhythm. Clara walked to the river each morning, collected driftwood and reeds. She fixed one stall at a time, her fingers raw and cracked, the hammer's handle worn smooth from use. She sang sometimes, softly, under her breath, songs her mother had sung while tending fires long ago. One afternoon, as she was dragging a beam across the yard, a shadow crossed her path. A man on horseback stopped near the gate, tall, broad-shouldered, with the look of someone used to working in silence. His name, she would learn later, was Elias Boone, the carpenter who repaired the mill downriver. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "You're working this place alone?" She nodded. "It's enough." He looked at the sagging roof, then at her blistered hands. "If you need help patching that, I got some spare boards left over." She wiped her brow with her sleeve, studying him. "I'll manage." He smiled, not mocking, not pitying, just gentle. "Didn't say you wouldn't. Just said I had boards." He glanced toward Rufus, who was sniffing his boot. "Fine dog. Best I ever had." Elias dismounted and helped her lift the beam without another word. When it was done, he stood back, nodded once, and said, "Looks better already." Then he climbed back on his horse and rode off into the haze, leaving her heart strangely unsettled. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Rain had begun to fall, soft, steady, tapping against the tin roof. She rose to check for leaks, moving through the dim lantern light. Rufus followed, his ears twitching. Near the corner of the barn, her boot caught on something loose, a plank that shifted with a hollow creak. She knelt, pried it up, and felt cold metal beneath her fingertips. She pulled out a rusted tin box, no bigger than a loaf of bread, its hinges stiff with age. Mud clung to the corners. The fire's glow made it look almost alive. She sat on the floor, the rain whispering above, the dog's head resting on her knee. She didn't open it, just stared at it as if it might speak. What could be inside? Money? Letters? Bones of a story no one remembered? Her breath trembled. Maybe some things are better left buried, she murmured, though she didn't put it back. She kept it close, beside her as she drifted into uneasy sleep. Outside, the rain deepened, washing the dust from the barn's sides, making the wood gleam again, as though the mountain itself was trying to give her a second chance. By morning, the mist had returned, heavy and white. From the distance, she could see Elias Boone riding past again, slow, thoughtful, his coat dark with rain. He lifted his hand when he saw her. She hesitated, then raised hers too, a quiet acknowledgement, nothing more. But the gesture lingered, like the first spark of warmth in a long winter. Down in town, Martha Griggs leaned out of her porch and whispered to her neighbor, "That mountain woman's got herself a man already. Poor fool, regret it soon enough." Sheriff Deke, overhearing as he tied his horse nearby, sighed. "Leave her be, Martha. The world's already punished her enough." But the words drifted off on the wind. Gossip carried faster than grace. Back up on the ridge, Clara knelt beside the tin box and finally placed her hand over it. The lid was cool, silent. She didn't open it. Not yet. She just looked out at the long reach of pine hills fading into the sky and whispered, almost to herself, "I just want something to grow here again." Rufus pressed his muzzle to her hand, as if to say it already had. The morning after the storm, Clara woke to the smell of wet ash and pine needles. The barn was still standing, though half the roof sagged under the weight of rain. Rufus nosed her hand, his fur damp, his eyes bright with that steady, wordless devotion that had carried her through more nights than she could count. She rose, shoulders aching, and pushed the warped door open to find Elias Boone standing outside, his coat dark with rain, hat low over his brow. "Didn't mean to intrude," he said quietly. "Just thought I'd see if the place survived." "It's still here," she answered, voice rough from sleep. He held up a small bundle. "Brought nails. And coffee." She blinked, caught off guard by the kindness. "You shouldn't have." He shrugged. "Don't rightly know how to stop myself from mending things." That made her smile, the first real one in a long time. Together, they worked through the gray morning, hammering and lifting. The barn's beams echoed like slow heartbeats. She moved carefully, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, hair falling loose from her braid. Elias didn't speak much, but when he did, his voice was gentle as rain at by midday. The leaks were patched, the worst holes covered. They shared the coffee in tin cups near the fire. Clara noticed the way his hands shook slightly, not from cold, but memory. He told her about the house he'd built years ago for a woman who never lived to see it finished. She told him about the family ranch, about the fire that had taken her father and everything else. They didn't look at each other much while they spoke. It was easier to tell the truth to the air. When Rufus began pawing at the tarp in the corner, Elias laughed softly. "Your dog's got secrets on his mind." Clara hesitated, then pulled the tarp away. Beneath it sat the tin box, edges still stained with mud. That he raised an eyebrow. Buried treasure? Buried something, anyhow. She lifted the lid. Inside were silver coins, dull and uneven, a small locket tied with a faded ribbon, and a letter burned along one side. She handed him the paper. The ink was smeared, but he could still make out the words. "My dearest Rose, if you find this, I made it through the crossing. I'll send for you come spring. Wait for me at the red barn by the ridge. Thomas." The name meant nothing to her, yet it filled the air like a sigh from another lifetime. "Looks like someone else once loved this place," Elias said quietly. "Or left it behind." She murmured that he folded the letter and placed it gently back in the box. Maybe both. Their eyes met for a long moment, and the silence between them was different now. Not empty, but full. By evening, the sky had cleared, though whispers in town had already darkened. Martha Griggs saw Elias leaving Clara's barn and wasted no time filling every year with poison. "They're sharing more than boards up there," she said, voice slick with satisfaction. Others nodded, some curious, some cruel. Sheriff Deke rode up the ridge a few days later. He dismounted slowly, hat in hand. "Clara," he said gently, "I ain't here to scold. Folks are talking, and I'd rather keep it from ton-in ugly." She smiled thinly. "Let him talk. They've got nothing better to do." He looked at her, the tired, proud line of her shoulders, and said, "You don't deserve what they say. You never did." After he left, she sat in the doorway, watching the light fade behind the pines. She wanted to believe his words, but years of loneliness had carved too deep. When darkness came, she curled against Rufus and whispered, "We'll just keep building, boy. That's all we can do." The next night, she woke to barking, frantic, wild. Flames flickered through the cracks in the boards. The rear wall of the barn was on fire. Smoke poured thick and black into the rafters. Rufus was trapped inside the stall, whining, pawing at the door. Clara didn't think. She ran straight into the heat, her bare feet slipping on ash. The air clawed her throat. She found Rufus tangled in rope, flames licking at the straw. She cut him loose, coughing, choking, half blind. Through the blaze, she saw a shape, Elias, crashing through the side door, covering his face with his arm. "Clara!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Come on." She tried to lift Rufus, but the smoke was too thick. Elias grabbed her, dragging them both toward the light. The roof groaned above them, ready to give. Together they stumbled through the side wall, tumbling into the dirt just as the beams fell behind them in a roar of fire and sparks. Rufus whined, singed but alive. Clara fell to her knees, coughing, her face streaked with soot and tears. The rusted tin box lay open in the dirt, its contents scattered, coins rolling into the grass, the locket broken, the letter curling into embered ash. Elias knelt beside her, breath heavy. "You're hurt." She shook her head. "No, just lost something that never was mine." He placed his coat over her shoulders, his hands trembling. "You can't keep fighting alone, Clara. There's nothing noble in starving for pride." She looked at him, eyes wet, voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't alone. Not while he breathed beside me." Rufus nudged her hand again, tail thumping weakly. Rain began to fall, sudden and cool, dousing the last of the flames. The three of them sat there in the dark, the world reduced to the sound of rain and a heartbeat's worth of silence. Days later, townsfolk came, not out of curiosity this time, but shame. Elias led them, his tools slung across his back. Deke brought spare lumber. Even Martha Griggs came carrying bread and a tin of salve, her eyes downcast, words stuck behind pride, and oh, one spoke much. Hammers replaced gossip. The rhythm of work filled the mountain air, slow and steady. Clara worked beside Elias, hair unbound, eyes soft with something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. When the new barn stood at last, clean and strong, they hung the locket above the door. The only thing left unburned, as the sun set behind the ridge, the mountain glowed gold. Rufus lay by the threshold, tail sweeping the dust, guarding what was now home again. Elias leaned beside Clara, watching the last light fade. 50 cents, he said quietly, almost smiling. Seems a fair price for a place like this. She looked at him, then at the mountains spread wide before them. Maybe not a price, she said softly. Maybe a beginning. The narrator's voice returns, like a whisper carried through time. They said the mountain woman paid 50 cents for a ruin. But I saw her by something greater, the courage to begin again. Sometimes that's all a soul can afford. Sometimes that's all a soul needs. And as dusk gathered over the valley, the new barn glowed warm with lamplight, the smell of sawdust and bread in the air, the quiet sound of a woman laughing again, the kind of laughter that only comes after loss, when the heart finally believes it might still be allowed to heal.